Hello and welcome to busyworksbeats.com. Today I'm going to show you how to make some authentic hip hop right inside of FL Studio. You guys will get the project files for free. Back in the day, authentic hip hop was a drum break mixed with a musical sample, whether it was a loop or they chopped up the drum break to play one shots. It just depended on the song. So firstly, what we want to do is get a vibe. And also too, you guys want to find, I'll leave a link below if I remember, but you want to download the MPC 60 Quantize settings for FL Studio. You have to download these. These do not come with FL Studio. So to search on Reddit, MPC Quantize FL Studio, you should find this folder here for download. So basically what we want to do is find the sample. So if you guys need help finding samples, you should spend a day and just find as many samples as possible. You have Hip Hop is Red. You have the Internet Archive. You have our Discord, discord.gg/busyworksbeats. So we've listed all these samples for you guys for the most part. Let's go to samples, my samples folder, and let's find some samples. So you have to determine what type of vibe you're going for. Old school can be danceable. It could be gritty. So let's pick a lane and it could be, any of those lanes. Let's just start with some 50 Cent samples here. I'm going to turn off my mic so it doesn't feedback. Also, one tip, you could, once you click a sample, hit shift and then you can left click and jump around the sample. Pretty useful there. So hit shift, left click to do that.
Since I first laid eyes on you, my darling.
So we're going to listen to these samples and see if we can find a musical passage that's at least 2 bars long that we could loop. Or you guys can, again, do that old school chop technique. It just depends on what style you're going for. If you're going for more of a truncated style, which is like, then you might want to chop up a sample. But if you're going for just a vibe, I'd start with the 2-bar loop first, and then you can get microscopic when you want to. So let's just listen to the music and see if we can find 2 bars that's just open without too much drum activity.
Now that I'm a man for my very own, this is but a price laid eyes. Together, yeah.
So this sample gives me enough music to where we could chop it into multiple 2-bar increments. So the first step, I'm actually going to put my headphones on just so I don't have to keep switching back and forth. But basically what we're going to listen for is, sorry, y'all. That's why. Okay, first thing we're going to listen to is the music. Let's turn it down. We're not going to turn on the metronome yet. We just have to decide like what part are we going to loop. I think we want to loop the section where the vocals come in. Okay, so let's start chopping. So it's now that we, okay, so let's chop right. 1, 2. So grab your slice tool, hit Shift Alt to do vertical slice. 1, 2, and 3, and 4, and 2, and 2, and 3, and 4, and slice. And 2, 3, and 4, and 2, and 2, and 3, and 4, and slice. And 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and slice. See how it's hard to slice right here? Because you can't tell. That's why I'm saying and 2, and 3. Because it's really hard when you don't have a drum on the downbeat to slice sample. So I like to keep the drums in the sample first before, and then chop and then take the drums out if I have to. And 3, and 4, and 2, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3, and 4, and 2, and 2, 3, and 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 2 and 3 and 4 and slice and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 2 and 3 and 4 and slice. Okay, very hard to, like, you can't tell. And that's the hard part. People don't count out their music before they slice, and they end up slicing. You can't time stretch to fix a bad slice. So make sure you count out the music first. We're not using any metronome. Let's find another part of the song we could flip, potentially. Usually I'll stay away from all this instrumentation. We could use this as like a turnaround. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 2 and 2 and 3. I could tell it's off beat because the kick timing's even off. 1 and 2 and I might not even chop that part actually. Let's skip that. But these would be more of a hit, meaning like a single pad hit. Then I would focus on stretching these perfectly to loop. They're just more so like impacts. Okay, so right here we have an open bass, perfect for sampling. So we're gonna take this bass right here and we're gonna load this up as a one shot. We're just gonna hit shift down after we chop to move it away. Perfect. So let's chop this other one too, just in case. We have options for the bass there. So here's another open kick that we could use it, but again, now we're getting microscopic with our chopping. We don't want to overly get microscopic. Be dope if we found a snare. Here's something here. There we go. So we might be able to grab the snare. So I like to pull the drums from an actual record before I start looking for drum kits because it feels more organic from the record. You really have to know how to match your kick sounds to sound like they're from the same environment. So we have a kick, we have a snare. See if we can find a hi-hat somewhere. Here's one, but it has like something behind it. Can't tell with it. To control the highlight, hit shift down to pull that down.
Sweet, sweet love.
That could be a little vocal chop.
Sweet, sweet love.
Okay, so let's take that. So here's more of a chopper's approach where we're trying to like zoom in and find cherry pick sounds here. Here's another snare we might be able to get. That's a pretty dope. Now for this one, I'm going to chop it into two, so I know. All right, so this is, again, part of the song where it's really open and we can grab individual sounds without having to create stems at all. Let's see if we can find a loopable area. So again, we're looking for vocal ad-libs, drums, and impact sounds here. That was kind of dope. That was kind of fire. I don't like the moaning crap. Skip that. Could use that, but that's kind of vague. That's kind of fine. It reminds me of the movie Coming to America for some reason. So let's chop that. I may not use that though. This reminds me of Coming to America. So the rest of the song just fades out. Let's take all these chops. The hard part here is how do we drag them to the left? So just left click and just keep dragging. Now we have to, this is the processing part, which I might speed up this video. I'll show you guys how to do it, but you don't want to sit here and watch me do this. So basically we need to save these into samplers so that we could use them as if they were drum samples in our channel rack. For the most part, we need that kick and that snare. but the other samples we could just use normally. I'll show you guys how to do it, but again, this is very tedious and it takes time. So before we do that, let's just get rid of the excess here and just focus on what we have so far. Let's grab this mute tool to mute all this stuff. So far we have we have 3 2-bar loops. So let's grab these. Let me show you guys some stretch techniques. So firstly, you want to go to the BPM, the target BPM. So let's pull this to about, I like to visually just look at the sample and see how it stretches. So it's probably around 80 BPM normally. You don't want to stretch it too far. There's no rules for this, but the further you stretch it away from its original tempo, it's just going to sound faker and faker. So let's keep this around 80 for 79 BPM. And it makes stretching easier. So now we could just click in the top left, going to make unique a sample. This will make this specific chop into its own file so that it does not look at the rest of the song for time stretch purposes. So now we could double click in here, go to mode, stretch mode, and you could right click and select the bars. I learned that from Av McCree. You could also double click, go to the time knob. You can left click and drag to lock it to the grid. And the mix showed me that one. So here we could double click. And because it's on stretch mode, it will keep the same tonality, which is important because if I take it off stretch mode, it will change its tuning based on the BPM. We don't want that to happen. So even though it's stretched, it will sound different. We want it to sound the same as the record. So let's go to stretch mode. So when I change that BPM, it doesn't morph the tuning. Let's do the same exact thing here. So I'm going to show you guys a shortcut Infinite showed me. So highlight the audio, hit Shift Q to quantize it to the grid. Okay, that will quantize the beginning part of the sample. So let's double click, go to mode, stretch mode. Now see how this is the entire song. Still, we need to go back actually. Highlight this, hit Shift Q. Click in the top left, go to make unique as sample. Do this for each sample so that now when we double click, it's not looking at the entire song. It's only looking at this specific clip. Let's double click, go to mode, stretch mode, right click, select the amount of bars. In this case, 2 bars. And we just need to make sure that if we turn on the metronome at this point, it lines up. See how that kick kind of got offset at the end? See, these are the issues that we have when you sample from older records. They don't perfectly line up to the grid. I'll show you guys how to fix that. So right now it's not lining up. Okay, so that wasn't even a part of the chop. That was a vocal ad lib. So what we're going to do here is figure out how to morph it. So we need to figure out where does the beat go off beat. So to get granular, let's go to our snap to grid. Let's go to 1/4 beat. This will pull up a smaller grid where we can visually see where the transients aren't lining up. I can see it's right here. That kick was delayed. So let's grab this, make a slice so we can visually see. Grab the slip tool, highlight both of these. You can go in and hit Alt and then left click to pull this to the left. Now this sample, we're just gonna have to pull it further to the left. Now to cover this like blip or that emptiness, we could technically just fade it, but another way to do it is hit Shift Alt to do a vertical slice. And we want to grab this last piece, make it unique as a sample. And then now it should time stretch to fill the gap. Now, if it doesn't time stretch, you can manually just stretch it using the audio clips here. Click where it says stretch and hit Alt and stretch it however far you need it to be. So that's how you fix drums that are off the grid. Now here, even a little rushed at the end. So it's a little rushed, so let's grab the ending here. Grab that slip tool, hit Alt, left click. So I figured out where it was. Let's actually make a chop over here. Shift Alt, do a vertical slice right at that kick. Grab the slip tool, hit Alt, left click. And because these are similar, like the in-between between here and here, we shouldn't be able to hear this little gap there. But if we did, you would have to slice at the snare. Let's just listen to it. There's a little stutter, so let's fix that. So grab this slice tool, hit shift. This time we're gonna right click to get rid of the excess. So this is the audio gap. Let's hit shift alt to do another slice. Go on the top left, make it unique as a sample. Double click, and now we can either use the time knob or in the top left, go to this audio stretch tool. Hit alt manually, and now we could drag that specific sample out. And nobody could really tell. So let's make sure everything's on beat. Even this little gap at the end, let's fix that. Okay, so these are micro nudges. You don't have to get this particular with your sampling. But for my ear, it's gonna correct some of these things here. We're gonna make anything that's empty, make it unique as a sample. Make sure it drags out. So now it feels more. So here's another technique. Once you have all these chops, I'd recommend you guys compile this. So let's just hit control, left click to highlight these. We're gonna re-render this as audio so that we can pitch everything up and down at the same time. Consolidate time selection, 512.6, 16-bit. Insert effects if you guys have any. Okay, so now it's its own file, but it's one file and not however many chops we made. So let's double click, go to mode, stretch mode. We can also right click, edit, whoops, wrong button there. Right click, edit in the audio editor, right click, delete any loops. We don't need this to loop. So let's just drag that back into the sampler like this. So now we can re-chop if we have to, but now it's a simple file. And now we could do things like change the pitch, for example. So that the drums are a little bit more lightweight. We could add our own drums underneath. So now what I'm listening for is just the timing. Make sure it's quantized. Let's hit Control L, send it to the mixer. Now, there's so much to teach y'all. I'm trying to teach you guys all the techniques. So let's highlight all these tracks, hit Control, left click to highlight all these, right click and route to this track only. We're gonna open up a parametric EQ2. And we're going to highlight all the tracks and turn them down. Okay, so we want headroom here. To create that 90s old school vibe, you want dynamic. And the way you get dynamic is simply just turning stuff down when you produce. So now we're going to go inside the parametric EQ2, and now we're going to boost to compensate for the volume difference. I like to boost 9 dB. You guys could choose whatever number you want. So now it feels like I turned stuff up in the actual mix, but it's not. So now we're increasing what's called headroom. So we're listening to that metronome to make sure it's on beat. Okay, so it loops good. Okay, so we have a lot of work to do with this record. We have to create one shots. Let me just show you guys a glimpse of it, and I'll do the hard work and then bring the video back in because it's too much to just sit here and watch me do this. So for the one-shot samples, we need to load these up in a sampler. Okay, because right now they're considered audio files. So we need to double click here. Actually, not double click, but let's go in the top left, make this unique as a sample. We're going to double click, and that will give us some options. But as you see, we're missing some of the envelope settings. So this is not a sampler. This is an audio clip. We can still do stuff to it, but I'd recommend you guys load this up in an audio clip. We could just right click, and let me see if we can do this fast. So let's open up a sampler. And we just got to find what that sample is called. So this is a little tricky with the windows here. You got to hit Alt in FL Studio to open up multiple windows here. So basically what I'm trying to see if I could do is drag this. I know what we could do. Let's right click, edit in audio editor, and just drag this into the sampler like that. So now we have things like an envelope if we want to truncate the sound. And just different functions that you don't get with an audio clip. Okay, so that's that. So that was a little bit quicker than I thought. So I'm going to do that for each drum sound. We have a kick, we have a snare, we have some of these bass notes. But the main thing here that you guys want to do is make this unique as a sample. So click in the top left, go to make unique as a sample for every single sample chop that you made so that it pulls it away from the song file. So that when you're editing, you're not editing the entire song. Because right now, if I double click in any of these windows, it considers it still the entire song. So we need to pause the video and do all this. All right, so I did find a shortcut as I was doing this. I found a shortcut. So we have the kick separated by itself. We have the snare number 2, hi-hat. So we're creating our own drum kit from the actual record here. So let's go to each chop. Let's right click and open in a new sampler. So that will give you more functions. As you guys can see, we don't have all the same tabs. Very important for things like truncation. So if you want to control the vocal like this one, it just kind of plays all the way out. But I want it to be truncated. So let's go to the envelope tab, turn the whole parameter up, turn everything else down. And now we can play it like, okay, so that's what you can't do just using a simple audio clip. Okay, so that is vocal 6. Now it does get a little messy on the screen, so you guys got to be aware of where you are. So this does save a lot of time in the process. So I just wanted to show you guys that. So we have the vocal 1. Okay, so let's keep doing this. All right, so I want to be honest with you guys, that took a good 5 to 10 minutes. That takes a long time. So that's why I usually don't like chopping drums that way from a sample, because it just takes too long to load up. Now we have everything. It's all truncated, so now I can hit a note. Now also too, for some of these, I would filter like a vocal. You can go in here, go to high pass filter, and just get rid of that low end. So I'm going to also do this for each vocal chop. We can do the same thing for the bass. A lot of old school retro samples, depending on how musical they were, they would add a low pass filter. So instead of this, it might add a filter, especially if it had a kick in the bass underneath. They would filter it so the music's still there, but it's not as harmonically rich. So that's another technique. We'll see if we use that technique on those impact sounds. Now that we have everything, double click, hit Control L, send it to the mixer. And now we can start. Now the sample has drums, so our goal is to not get in the way of their drums. They're fine to be in the sample, but we want to add stuff over top. So depending on the sample and how much high frequencies you guys have, you might have to do your own hi-hats. It just depends on the sample. There's no right or wrong way, but normally I usually start with the hi-hat because I want to create a rhythm. So let's do the hi-hat first, but we might not need it because the sample's so rich in high frequencies. And then after that, we're going to quantize it using those MPC settings, and I'll show you guys how to quantize with a score as opposed to the default quantize. Okay, so now we have all this settled. Let's hit Control L, send these samples to the mixer, because what we want to do at this point is group them together. So we have channel 16 and 2. We're going to group these into a subgroup called the sample group. Hit Control, highlight both of these, right click the up arrow and go to route to this track only. Now the samples go into this channel. And what I want to do is get rid of the bass because it's going to fight against our added bass. So let's just go ahead and add a high pass filter with a curvature like this, so it's a sharper dB per octave. Just gonna get rid of the bass tones. Anything below 80, really, we're probably gonna cut. Okay, so now let's go in and add the snare, and then we'll do the kicks and the bass afterwards. Now we did slower hi-hats, but let me show you guys here. So we have, again, most people are used to Alt Q, which is quantize, or Control Q, which is quantize by the grid. In this case, let's hit Alt Q, and most people don't realize there's a template section here. We could load up what are called score or groove templates. Let's just open this up. And in FL Studio, there's a folder for this. We're gonna go to the scores folder, and I put my MPC stuff in this folder. So I had to download it from the website. Hopefully I remember to link it. If not, just Google MPC Quantize FL Studio. It should put, or MPC FL Studio score, something like that. Somebody made a kit for it. So let's figure out where I put these files. So let's go to my browser here, just to double check where I put these. And I believe I put them in the scores folder. So let's make sure we know the directory here. So the scores folder will be in image line, FL Studio presets scores. Okay, in my documents folder. So let's hit Alt Q, and I have to find that specific place. So this is not in the same thing. This is in a patches folder under data. So it's not going to give you the same thing. Let's go to documents, image line. And I kind of forgot what the subfolders were that fast. So let me pause this video and try to remember. I think it was FL Studio presets. That's what it was. And then it was scores. And here's our stuff here. So we have the MPC 50%. We have 70% quantize. So let's just try different ones to see the vibe. Let's just load up the first one here. Now, because we're using a very simple hi-hat, it's not a complex thing to quantize. But what you want to do is mess with the start time and the sensitivity. So this will lock it to their specific quantize settings, okay, which change per the file. So every file is different here. And again, you have to download these. These do not come with FL Studio. I want to say that a lot because people are going to say, where is this at? You have to download these. These do not come with FL Studio. Now, again, our hi-hats aren't too complex, but if you see me, if you watch the start time, if you move the start time, you guys can see the hi-hats are gripping to a different place. Okay, so let's hear the difference here. So I definitely feel the timing difference. What it also does is it changes the velocity to like the top value, 127. So you're getting more of a volume change. So just keep that in mind. Now, in this point in the sample, I'm going to try to retrace the bass. It's hard to hear over these drums because everything's just loud. But what I'll do is I'll take my time and listen to the bass notes. Okay, so now we're going to play this one shot as if it's a multi-timbred instrument. So we're spreading the sample across the keyboard to allow us to play multi-keys here. Not multi-keys, but multiple keys. I'm going to quantize the bass notes just like I did the drums there. Only thing is the groove at the end of that loop where it goes with you, it just kind of doesn't match the drum timing. So I would do little things like side chaining to cover up that difference in the groove. But for now, we're not going to waste time on the minutia. But that is something to pay attention to, is that time difference at the end of that groove, of the sample, I mean. Now we have the majority of the stuff here. We can add the vocal chops and the different impact sounds, see if they fit in. I might change the hi-hat timing. Let's go inside the hi-hats. I didn't realize the hi-hats were busier in the sample. Let's highlight these hi-hats. Let's hit shift, left click, and drag them over. Now, right now, it's just playing the same velocity all the way through. So let's hit Control Z to go back until all these are highlighted. Hit shift, left click to drag the velocity so that they're lowered. So now it goes high, low, high, low. This creates more dynamic. So I think that quantizes for their swing. So that's adding like a time difference in the notes, vertical notes. So I'm determining if I want the swing or not. So I'm doing little stuff like nudging the sample over to get it more in the pocket so that the drums don't feel delayed. So that's what I'm doing here. So notice how I'm using these ad libs as a way to keep the music interesting over time. We're not overly filling the beat with the same chop over and over again. All right, so now we're going to run the drums through a plugin called Genome. This loads up NAM profiles, which model outboard gear. I like to shop at Analog X. They have really good NAM profiles. So I'm going to run the drums through what's called the Zulu, which I had a real Zulu. So if we run this through the Zulu, that will give us tape emulation on the drums. It just adds more impact. Also, you guys can try the SSL, for example. Let me just load up some of the stuff I have here. Analog X, I got these from Analog for Life. I bought them off the website from Analog X. So these are running through the SSL 4K, I believe, console, and you could drive the signal to crunch the drums, similar to Dr. Dre, for example. for the vocal chops, for the creative chops, like the vocal chop, we can run these through either delay or reverb. So I'm going to group these into a group, just call it vocal chops, and send this as a send by left clicking the up arrow this time, opening up a reverb on this channel. And that way we can send a certain amount of the signal over to a reverb just to make it a little more of a dramatic effect. You don't need to do this. Let's just hear what it sounds like first. So what I did is I nudged the bass earlier so that the bass you feel the bass by the time it's in the pocket, because if you just played it quantized to the grid, it would sound delayed and it made the beat sound slow. So at this point we could add more instruments just to fill up the beat, but let's just see if we need more stuff or not. I feel like the hi-hat just stands out a little too much. So here's some techniques to get a wider sound, for example, without doing too much. We can make this unique. We don't need to make it unique as a sample, just a different thing here. Go to pre-computed effects and just widen the sample here with stereo delay. It gives you a little more room in the center. And also helps the timing issues. stuff over. We're gonna make sure we copy the filter. Let's see what else we could add from the keyboard. Drums could go a little bit harder, but for now we're not going to go crazy with the drums. It's just like a timing issue with that kick, that bass. Just might need to pull the kick earlier. Doubled it up by accident. Let's hit Control Shift. Now I feel like the kick and the bass are working together more properly. So it is a little bit ahead of the beat, but that's what gives it that sound. Let's see what other keyboard sounds we have. Find that other chord we want to use with this. Let's just add some just keep recording some ideas. If I do add this low bass, it's going to clash with the bass guitar. I was like, let me hit the wrong note here. Of course I did. Try changing the bass. It might not work for this vibe, but let's just see if we change the bass notes. messed it up, but the drums will definitely need to change at the end there to match that timing of the bass. So that's how we introduce the darkness to the sound. That doom 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 needs to match with the kick. It needs to be doom doom doom, something like that. So let's make the kick unique. So let's do the doom doom doom, something like that. It's kind of hard to get this timing. I didn't realize that was what the kick sounded like. That's crazy. So we need tresillo. So it's tresillo, tresillo, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We need to match that. So we need to, it's kind of tricky because we have to take out multiple instruments here. I think there's a snare that lines up. Anything, we'll pull the snare earlier. So the bass needs to match that timing too. So we need to make sure that all these instruments match. Let's see what else we're missing here. I think the bass. Yeah, the bass is doing its own thing. So right here, the kick and the bass is not matching up. I don't think. Something. Okay, the bass comes in early, that's why. All these little changes people don't take the time to do, and that's why their beats don't really sound cohesive. So we got to do the hard work here. So right here. And then have that same doom, doom, doom. It should match, but then I think we are missing some bass stuff here. Right here needs to match the dun, dun, dun. All right, so I think kick's a little too active. So really important that stuff hits at the same time. So what I'm going to do is just loop that because I played it differently the second time around. And instead of redoing all that bass, it's going to copy and paste. That way it's all cohesive. So let's hear it from the beginning. Still more instruments we can add. So now I'm going to add my modern touch. That sound was from Helios at busyworksbeats.com/Helios. It's a Serum 2-pack. It comes with over 300 sounds for Serum. These are custom sounds that are not just presets. These are actually multi-samples that I've manipulated in Serum 2. All right, so go to busyworksbeats.com/Helios for that. So now what I'm going to do is actually take the beginning drums that we had. I think it was this one. I'm kind of mixing up what's what. I think it was these right here because I kept that same kind of bounce. Make sure that same bounce lines up. Some adding in texture sounds here, usually top line sounds that are more expressive. Okay, it's a little accent stuff. So we definitely have more rebalancing to do. But if you guys want to learn more about how to make beats like the pros, go to busyworksbeats.com/premium to start your 14-day free trial. Peace out, guys.